Welcome, y'all. My name is Nevin Kamath, and I'm here to co-moderate tonight's webinar, which is the 11th episode in the series, How to Become a Leader in the Trump Resistance. Tonight's episode is going to be about advanced nonviolent resistance strategy. And we're going to be covering a couple of topics that I can tell you that I encountered very early on when I tried to develop the Resist Trump campaign and Resist Austin, our first pilot resistance group chapter. Those two concepts or frameworks are called as follows. The first is the spectrum of allies. And it's this idea that, well, I won't steal the thunder of our speaker, but it's like your allies are on a spectrum and you want to pull them closer to you is the really, really like short of it. And understanding who your allies are from a Resist Trump campaign perspective was like an exercise that we did in a group. And it was, I think, very valuable to just kind of map things out and figure out, okay, well, where do we stand and who's with us and who's against us and what do we do about both of those things? And then the other idea is the pillars of support, which really became integral to our theory of change, both for the Resist Trump campaign, but also for Resist Austin, our pilot chapter, in terms of like, where do we focus our attention and what do we do with our actions? So that's a little bit about how we've used the tools that you're going to be learning about tonight in practice. And we'll go into much more depth over the course of tonight's webinar. Tracy?
Thank you very much. We have, I'm losing my place already. I can't believe that.
It's okay.
Our vision is a future without Trump and his enablers in power. Our mission is lawful, nonviolent civil resistance of Trump and his enablers. Our values are collaboration, integrity, nonpartisanship, and professionalism. We have us here. See our pretty little pictures. We've got our wonderful Nevin and me. We are our co-moderators for this evening. A lot of what we do and how we work is based on the First Amendment. So we are utilizing two to three of the 5 basic freedoms in this very meeting. Lawful nonviolent civil resistance, is protected by the First Amendment as described in the article by the Foundation of Individual Rights and Education here. You got that, or you want me to share it?
No, I got it.
Thank you. The First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So there's several things in there that we are currently using to our advantage, if you might say. Our freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, all that kind of good stuff. Okay, how to become a leader in the Trump resistance series. This is a basic overall view of the series in general. If you see we have 12 episodes, sort of into 3 sections. The first one is in that yellow spot down there. Those are the first 4. And then we had like a mid-range, which is the ones in the gray. And now we're in the red. It sounds worse than it is, but we are in the home stretch. What we're doing now is much more advanced work Module 1, back here in the yellow, we did all kinds of early beginning, how do you get set up? And at the end of that module, we had an assignment to form or host an effective get-together. Find a couple people together and get together and talk about what's going on and what you can do to help move along. That second section, the gray section, is the middle area, module 2, and that was kind of a mid-range stuff. We learned about social media and staying safe with de-escalation. And at the end of that module, we had an assignment to lead a lawful protest. Doesn't have to be very many, doesn't have to be very big. Personally, I got out on the front of my street with a couple of friends and signs and had a great time. It's a busy street, so we got a few honks. Now we're in module 3. We looked at advanced media techniques, fundraising. Tonight we're doing advanced nonviolence strategy. And at the end of this module, we are asking that people form a ResistPod. And we're going to go in more detail about exactly what a ResistPod is later. But basically, get those same few people or different few people, whatever, just a few people together who can commit to each other to meet on a regular basis and work on making a difference. And hopefully that will then grow and all that kind of fun stuff. So here is where we are. Last week, we did fundraising, fueling the movement. We did both grassroots and major gifts sections there. Tonight, we're going to be doing advanced nonviolent resistance strategies. And we're going to look at the spectrum of allies and the pillars of support. I've heard a lot about both of these, but you can never learn too much. I always learn something new every time I hear somebody's new perspective on it. So I'm really looking forward to that. Next week, we're going to talk about starting a ResistPod. We're going to assembling your core team and securing a legal foundation when you're ready for that. So I do believe, okay, our agenda for tonight. Next, we're going to have our fabulous speaker. Joe Worthy is going to come in and he's going to speak about the spectrum of allies. And then we're going to have a brief question and answer period. You can put your questions in the Q&A. We're going to have a quick little breakout rooms and discuss what we've learned and the questions we may continue to have. And then a little Mentimeter exercise where you can use your phone then to type in your answers to questions and we can see them right on the screen. And then Mr. Worthy will be talking about the pillars of support, and we'll go through the same basic, Q&A breakout group and Mentimeter after that. And then we're going to close up and figure out where we're going from here. So, is this where I stop? Nevin, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think so. I can go ahead and share when you're ready.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
All right. Looks like I'm sharing, which is great. Folks, it is my pleasure to introduce Joe Worthy, who is a community organizer and strategist who collaborates with community members to build power through strategic nonviolent action. Throughout his career, he has partnered with leaders and local groups to drive systemic change. His efforts have led to significant victories, including coaching a community group in Cote d'Ivoire that successfully shut down a coal mine, as well as helping to end zero tolerance policies in Boston and expand healthcare access for mothers in Mississippi. Previously at the Children's Defense Fund, Joe focused on dismantling the cradle to prison pipeline. He engaged with the community in response to the murders of Tamir Rice and Tanisha Anderson in Cleveland, which resulted in a landmark policy that fundamentally shifted the relationships between residents and police. This policy empowered residents to address misconduct by police officers through suspensions. Joe studied at Heidelberg University and the University of Oxford and served as a community fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. It is my pleasure to introduce and welcome Joe Worthy. Joe, are you able to join me on stage?
Here I am.
Hey,
How you doing?
doing well, doing well. Joe, it's a pleasure. As I mentioned, I have really enjoyed getting to know you over the last few months, and I'm really excited about the fact that we're collaborating on this and the conversation that we're going to be having that touches really on your areas of expertise. I didn't mention that you are a founder of the Strategic Nonviolence Academy, and I want to maybe start our questions before we get to the spectrum of allies but just asking you, what is the Strategic Nonviolence Academy? Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so briefly, the Strategic Nonviolence Academy is um, a place where people come together and learn the essentials of strategic nonviolent action. So we have a 12-week course. And I guess, what makes it distinct is that as an academy, we focus on three components that we think are integral to strategic nonviolence work. That is the head, obviously, being able to develop effective strategy, the feet, being able to effectively mobilize and build a base, and a heart. And the heart, some call it principled nonviolence, but really locking in and understanding your inner world so that you can be more effective in the outer world. And it really extends to things in movement spaces like burnout and things like that. So the academy is basically a place to learn about those things, but hopefully it's also a place for new ideas and collaboration and just deep thinking about how do we build this better world that we want to do. So I like to say, in the academy, uh, you don't just get good at talking about strategic nonviolence; you get good at strategic nonviolence. And so that is one of the defining features, I think, creating leaders of consequence through that process. Very similar to what you're doing here. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds great, and I love the fact that you're looking at the inside out, which is like a really powerful concept in leadership development. Helping people develop on the inside helps them change the world around them, and that's where a lot of work can really begin. I love that. I love that concept. And yeah, it's really interesting and cool that we're both like working on like 12 episode or 12 step
Mhm,
programs.
yeah.
So that's great. Cool. So maybe we can jump into Spectrum of Allies. Would that be all right if we do that now?
Yep, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So before we jump into like just the details of Spectrum Allies, like when did you like do you remember the first time you encountered the concept and like where you came across Spectrum of Allies in the first place?
It's been so long. I don't know that I can remember the first time
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
ever came um, um, across it. But when I did, one of the things that I realized is that it was a really effective way to figure out who was doing what in the community. I think a lot of times when we get into community spaces, a lot of the lines can be blurred around like who supports what and who's trying to do what. And I think what Spectrum of Allies allows us to do is to make clear like where people stand based on our perception of the issue, right? And I think, we live in a time where there's so much noise, right? It's hard to truly understand, like where people might stand on a thing. And I think what the spectrum of allies allows you to do is for you all to take, like your own perspective where you stand on it, and you see where people stand in relationship to where you are, right? And I think that's what's so important about the concept, because in a world where everyone tries to make things gray, it can be hard to get a handle on how you're going to move forward in the community without it.
Got it. Nice. Thank you. So we've talked around it a little bit. Maybe we can go right to it. What is the spectrum of allies, and why is it a powerful tool in nonviolent resistance?
Yeah. So, the spectrum of allies is a half circle that's really broken into 5 parts. If you wouldn't mind, I just share my screen just really
Yeah,
quick.
don't mind at all.
And what you'll see here is that it's a half circle that's broken into 5 parts. And what you have on the very left is you have your active allies, and on the right, you have your active opposition. And the idea is on the left side, on the very left side, these are the people here who are actively trying to help you win whatever it is you're trying to do. So that first person that you're thinking about calling to start your pod, that person is an active ally, right? And the people who would be completely against you forming a pod, that's the active opposition who would actively try to stop you from reaching your goals. That's the whole idea. Right. Then you have other people who are passive allies and passive opposition, right? These people are, and the passive allies are people who support what you're doing, but they're not really engaged in it, right? They're not yet trying to start a pod, or they're not like coming out to an event or protest. They just, for lack of a better term, they'll like or heart your post on social media, right? But they won't do anything beyond that, right? So that's a passive ally, and the passive opposition are people who are the antithesis of that, right? So they will dislike or make a bad comment on your post online, but they won't actively try to stop you from doing what you're trying to do, right? And the people who are neutral, there are several reasons for people to be neutral. Some people are just apathetic in general. Some people may not have all the facts. Some people, just may not be paying attention. But these are the people who don't land on one side or the other, right here. And these are the people who a lot of people think are ripe for sort of like recruitment and engagement, to pull people onto your side. The idea, though, is if you look at these arrows here, is that you want to actively, what this gives you the ability to do is to identify who are the people in these places and actively pull them over to your side. The idea being that we want to take people from being, in most cases, from being neutral all the way to being an active ally. That's like an activated leader who might start another pod or something like that. Um, and even in some cases, right, you take the passive opposition and you turn them into active allies, or at least get them to be neutral on the issue. And in some very rare cases, you might even be able to get the active opposition over to active ally. But people over here generally have some other sort of vested interest in why they're opposing you, that's deeper than sort of like them maybe understand an issue. And to be clear, to be honest, like all of this is probably deeper than trying to understand an issue. But I just wanted you all to see it so that you understand sort of like how it works, and particularly like how you might be able to use it in your
I
process.
love it. I love it. I love it. I really appreciate the in-depth example of like a passive ally being kind of like someone who likes your posts on social media but isn't necessarily at your protests or something like that, or supporting you in other ways. And I love the fact that like that kind of like passive opponent is someone who maybe like just ignores your posts or maybe like comments negatively on them or something like that. I think it's a really accurate description of what you would see. I'm curious if you have any ideas for groups about concrete strategies that organizers have used to successfully move people or groups one step closer to being active allies from anywhere on the spectrum.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, like I can, speak about, my own experience. I was working with a group somewhere, and we did a very similar, well, we did actually the spectrum of allies. And what we found was that there was an incredible amount of people they at least saw who were neutral, right? And so that wasn't going to be helpful because they didn't have very much power on their side based off of their first assessment. And so, one of the first things that we decided that they were going to try to do was to do I think we were calling it a story campaign, right? Where they went to these neutral parties who they identified and just talked to them, had a conversation about their perspective, an attempt to, make them more passive allies and then active allies, right? There are other situations in history. For example, a group out of Chicago. I don't know if anyone's from Chicago in here. It's this group called the Young Lords. They were a wonderful group operating out of Chicago, and they were very upset with the lack of engagement by the church, right? And I think a lot of people can look at the church and ask, in some cases, look at the church and say, how come you aren't engaging in the same rigor as the, as the churches on the other side? So anyway, they, um, they saw this process and they did a campaign where they actually used nonviolent intervention on the churches and they began to sit in on, I think it was United Methodist churches, right?
Hmm.
Because I think that was their denomination, and to sit in on those churches in a way that called them to do what it is they said they were going to do through their religious beliefs, right? And for all intents and purposes, it was an effective way to kind of snap the church out of their sort of lull in their sense and get them to start to engage in the fight for justice, right? Um, and so just like you would do with an opponent, there are a plethora of methods that are available to you to engage in both neutral and passive allies, right? And I think it's important uh, that you think of it in that way as well, because a lot of times these things can go beyond conversations. These things can go beyond protests. There are a lot of creative ways through which you can bring people over to your side through creative, strategic nonviolent action, right?
Yeah.
There are certain things that you might be able to do, like say, for example, a mock funeral, or a candlelight visual for your passive allies, especially, right? When you're directly aiming it at them, to call them to come out and do what it is that they said they were going to do, or to step up when, when you think the time is right. But do it in a way that is a way of like calling them into the place, like the Young Lords did. They did a sit-in, but they did it in a way that were like, we're calling you to live up to the values that you said you had. It wasn't in a way that made the church kind of want to back out. It was intervention, but it was a loving intervention, right? In that sense, and I think that's one of the most powerful examples throughout history of moving people on the spectrum from sort of a passive ally to a more active ally in that particular situation. And so history is rife with those types of situations. And I think it's important that we think about how we can use the spectrum of allies to effectively to engage just as creatively with our people who we want to be on our side as we would with the opposition.
Great. I love that. And I love that you like referenced several different types of techniques that I know are cataloged in Gene Sharp's 198 Methods of Nonviolent Action. I think you referenced a mock funeral, a
Hmm.
sit-in. I think you actually had another reference. I kind of escapes me, and it made me think also of a protest that I helped to lead in Austin. That was a die-in. like different kind of theatrical events that engage people in different ways and kind of reach out to your audience. You may not always be able to control who's seeing it, but it may affect people in different ways. So that's really interesting, man. I'm curious, like when it comes to like prioritizing those different groups, is it possible to you know, to share with us how you would recommend ResistPod prioritizing how they engage with people that have identified in, let's say, the neutral area or passive opponents, or and is there, once you kind of map where people stand and you understand like who they are, how do you like prioritize your time as to where you're engaging? I guess is my question.
Mm. That's a really good question, and that would largely be up to um, specifically like what it is you're trying to do. And this is sort of bleeding into pillars of support, but they're very closely connected. So, like, say, for example, um, probably the most immediate or highest priority pillar is like a local grocery store, right? And a lot of people who are passive allies work at the local grocery store, right? Then you should probably, you know, uh, look to start to engage in those passive allies who work at that local grocery store. Um, uh, it goes the same, for any other situation that you're in. You're looking at, what is the action that is going to get us closer to our strategic objectives. Uh, you know, not necessarily the fastest, but maybe, the most effectively, right? And that's one way to make the decision. If you're going the momentum route, right, and you want to prioritize, say, for example, like numbers, and numbers are going to help you get visibility and recruit more people, or maybe those numbers will help you turn those neutral people, active, right? Then you probably would want to start looking at like, okay, so who are the passive allies, and how can we start to engage those passive allies and get them out active, right? So it'd be harder to get someone to jump from neutral outside of some like external event that really activated a lot of people, right? Like if you're talking about your boots on the ground and what it is you're trying to do, you would probably want to start to build that momentum with those passive allies, right? Start holding those events, start having those coffees, start moving people to be more comfortable with being more active in the resistance, right? And so I hate to say it, but sort of, the strategy calls me to say it depends, right? But there are several different ways. But the point is that, stemming from the question is that you should prioritize your approach, right? Like, and you should think about in what ways you want to engage, and who and for what reason do you want to engage these folks first.
I love that. Yeah, I love the nuanced response that you gave me there. And it also makes me think about the group that we're working with in Kern County that, is like a mirror. It's like an opposite in a way of my group in Austin, which is like a blue dot and like a red sea. People could say that of Texas, right? In Kern County, Bakersfield is kind of like a red dot in like a blue sea. And so their spectrum of allies, some people say so, right? Bakersfield, California is somewhat of a conservative city. That's what I mean by that.
Mhm.
And so like, the spectrum of allies might look really different for them as it does for us. And that exercise might feel very different for them, and how they want to engage those people. So that was just a reflection that I had as you were talking through some of those things. The last thing I wanted to say as a reflection of what you said was like, with No Kings 2 coming up in October, on October 18th, maybe a really good opportunity for, local resistance groups, resist pods, to engage people who are coming out in huge numbers, definitely not neutral, right? Maybe passive allies or active allies, and get a great opportunity to activate, and move people over into the active allies camp just by letting people know what you're up to, maybe having like a table or something like that. Anyway, last question for you on this topic is this: if you were to, say to a resist pod or a local resistance group, in like one or two sentences, how they should use spectrum of allies, what would it be?
I would say they should use spectrum of allies to understand to part of their situation, right? And to help them understand, who's on their side, who's not, and how you might go about prioritizing the power building process.
Nice. I love it. I love it. Thanks for that, Joe. You're always so insightful when it comes to these strategic nonviolence theory topics. And so I'm really grateful for you joining us for this segment. I'm going to shift over a little bit and let's see those emojis coming if you know how to use them, folks. I'm going to shift over a little bit and actually invite folks to share in the Q&A if they have any questions. You should have the ability to ask in the Q&A, but for some reason I can't find it. I don't know why. It should be here somewhere. Let me see. Do we have a Q&A? Let me see. Do you see a Q&A, Joe?
I don't actually. I
I
was
don't
looking
either.
for it.
Yeah, I don't know where it went. We usually have it by default, so we may not actually have it today. Maybe I could let me see.
I keep hearing
Might
a like a boop. So I think someone's asking a question somewhere. Just don't know where it is.
Yeah, I see some raised hands. Maybe we can actually just jump to people who are raising their hands. I see some raised hands or
Oh,
I
okay.
saw some raised hands in the crowd, but then they kind of went away. Deanna has a raised hand. Let me go to Deanna. Deanna, you can now unmute if you'd like.
Oh, I was just going to say, then we could use the chat for the questions. You could, it's disabled. We could open it and you could type questions there or just talk. But
Yeah, we could do either. Yeah, good idea. Let me go ahead and enable the chat. And if you have a question, go ahead. But otherwise, I'll just
well, I
enable the
went to
chat.
his website, and for your upcoming class, it looks like it already started in August. So are people joining in the middle of this 12-week thing, or do you offer it a few times a year? I wasn't sure from reading your website.
That's for you, Joe.
Yeah, good question. So if you click there's a new application up for February. Um, and you can go, it should be the immediate button as soon as you get in there. But yeah, no, we don't, you're sort of all the way in, all the way out. So if you join the class, you start from the beginning and you go all the way through.
Thanks for the question, Deanna. All right, I don't see any questions coming through the chat. Kay Mallet has raised their hand. Let me go ahead and allow Kay to talk. Kay, go ahead.
Hey, sorry, I just realized I should have put it in the chat. Excuse me, but I'm wondering how to access folks who might be, well, passive allies I can identify pretty easily. I have, a number of friends who are very active with me, some who are fully supportive and not active. But for neutral people or passive opponents, the good news, bad news is I'm surrounded by people who are liberal at my job, at where I live, my friends, my family. Um, does anyone, Nev or Joe or Tracy or anyone in the listening have an idea of how to, I guess, expand my world so that I can non-threateningly access people who don't think like I do and maybe, start up a relationship and chatting with them to get to the goals that we've all just been talking about?
I would say, from my point of view, what we encourage people to do in orientation that happens on Sunday nights is we encourage people to look to a couple of groups that engage with people on the other side politically. One group is called Braver Angels, and they're well known in the space of facilitating dialogue between people of different party affiliations. So you may want to check if there's a Braver Angels in your region. And then another one is called Crossing Party Lines that does more online conversations of a similar nature. You want to check them out too. They're also a very strong group that does good dialogue based work. I don't know, Joe, do you have any
Fantastic.
thoughts about that?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure.
Yeah. And Kay, did I see you were from Cleveland?
Yes, I am.
Oh, me too. So wonderful.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I thought I saw you say you were from Cleveland earlier.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So there's a couple of things here, right? that I'm hearing so based off of your thing. And the thing is about tools is that they're just tools, right? So um, there's a saying in strategy where you play the position you have, not the position that you want, right? And so what it sounds like is that you're in a position to engage with a lot of passive allies, right?
Mhm.
And so maybe
Yeah.
the question is, how do we more effectively engage those passive allies? Because
Yeah.
that's sort of like right around you, and that's the position that you've been dealt, right? And if they're not active yet, then the role is to get them active, right? Um, so you don't want to sort of search for neutrality just for neutrality's sake, even though those other people might be out there at some point, right? But if there's like work right in front of you, this is a situation where, like our situation calls us to prioritize these folks. So does that mean maybe like having a house meeting with these passive allies, like really sitting down and helping them understand what's their hesitancy for wanting to engage more fully? You might, learn, they might need more assurances or, might get different things. So that's something to think about. Now, from the neutrality point, right? That would be the next priority. Then, there's also ways to sort of like hold broader community events, sort of look at maybe local community spaces, of which in Cleveland, I know there are a lot of sort of like events that go on every weekend, where people are more neutral. I'd never be above setting up a table. I've built whole organizations from the ground up, going to a place, setting up a table, putting up a like a clipboard, and people stopping like, what are you here for? Oh, I'm here trying to organize for this and this and this and this. You know what I mean? Like that's where it started,
Yeah.
right? And so I know there's so many different places, maybe say for example like Van Aken, or I'm just saying this because I know where you live. I don't know where you live, but I know around the area. Like Van
Yeah.
Aken, the West Side Market, like all those places where you could go and you could maybe set up something and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. I think then you'll find also active passive allies and neutral opponents too. So don't be afraid to sort of like, elbow grease the whole thing with a table and a clipboard. It's very effective, tried and true approach to moving people on that spectrum of allies.
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate all of that from both of you. I had already thought about, well, the unfortunately, I live in a different city from most of my friends who are passive, but they're down in Columbus, so I could drive down there, and have been thinking about doing that and like inviting them to, an afternoon to chat, in all my free time. But I also like the idea of I like the maybe farther down the road resources of groups who are actively trying to reach out to people with different ideologies, worldviews, as well as just really grassroots, like set up a table. That honestly would never have occurred to me, but that's a great idea. So yeah, thank you very much. All of that's really helpful.
Thank you, Kay, for the question. I think we're getting a little crunched on time, so I'm going to move us into breakout rooms. Thanks for the questions, y'all. And let me go ahead and do that in a minute. Our first breakout group question is going to be, in your own community, who falls into the different parts of the spectrum of allies? Share one example of an ally you could strengthen and one opponent you might be able to neutralize. On this Menti question, we're going to ask the question, what's a new idea you acquired about the spectrum of allies framework, and what remaining questions do you have? So I'm going to open up Menti, go to that first Mentimeter, and present. So I'm going to say, let's just give this exercise maybe like a minute or so. You can go to menti.com on your phone or device and enter the code 34911708. And once you enter that code, it should give you like a box where you can put in your response of what's a new idea you acquired about the spectrum of allies framework, And what remaining questions do you have? So as we wait for that, let's see what else is going on. I don't see anything with Dora in the chat right now. All right. I'm going to go ahead and write my own ideas as well. People come in when you hit respond, you can type in your response, and that will enter a response. Got a question. Has anyone been involved with crossing party lines or local Braver Angels? 3491-1708. All right, looks like we don't have as many people engaging in this exercise, which is fine. It's always kind of an experiment. Oh, we have a few kind of things coming in. All right, work with secular and religious coalitions. Interesting. Learning of organizations that connect people of different political views and taking simple steps, such as setting up a table at e.g. Van Aken Shopping District, which this respondent lives a 5-minute walk from, which is great. This concept is brand new to me. What further reading do you suggest? Identifying passive folks to get involved. Got some good responses there. Joe, if you don't mind coming off mute for a second, you got any reactions to what you're seeing? Just kind of like quick reactions to what you're reading on the screen?
Yeah, there's a really good site called the Commons, the Social Change Library. I'm gonna put a link here for everyone to further read about the spectrum of allies. And the best thing about this link here is that you can they tie different topics to it, so they tell you about how to use it. There's also a neat little learn more section where you know you have another thing, but they also tie like different things to it, like arts and creativity, coalition building, and all things like that. So you can find different ways to engage with it. It's a really good resource, really well put together. So that would help you get more information on that.
I love it. Thank you, Joe.
Mhm.
All right, folks, let's jump into the next segment of our conversation, which is pillars of support, focusing pressure for maximum impact. And I'm going to set up a couple of questions for Joe. But Joe, maybe you could, while I do that, you could just tell us a little bit about, the pillars of support, why it's important.
Yeah, so the pillars of support are very important to your analysis and your advanced organizing, because the pillars of support are what source your both your opponents and yourself with power, right? And so a lot of times when we look at pillars of support, a lot of the videos and the things that are out that are like actually correct, right? Like they source our opponents with power, and if we remove those sources of power, right, those opponents either have to bend to our will or risk disintegration. That is, they lose all their power and they no longer exist in that same capacity, right? Um, and so that's essentially what the pillars of support is. But if you don't mind, I'll share my screen again so you can
Nope. Yeah, go ahead.
see what we have here. So these are the pillars of support in general, right? Now, one thing to be clear about, this is sort of like a a mock-up of like what the identified pillars of support in any society. So they have non-governmental organizations. In the United States, we call those nonprofits, right? So that would uh be sort of like any 501c3, the nonprofits, um in some cases, in a lot of cases, like colleges and universities, things like that, non-governmental organizations, right? But they are also not a business. religious organizations. We're seeing the effect of that. Workers, that's either union or non-union, right? But generally come in the form of a union, to be an established pillar, um, and sometimes not. Youth, the business community, media, the military, and the police. Now, each of these pillars, the important thing to understand about the pillars is that they're not just there to be there, right? They're there for a reason. And so each of those pillars actually source, um, the society with power, right? And these sources of power come in really six forms, right? Skills and knowledge, right? They know things, they know how to do things. Human resources, right? They can, like actively do the work to make sure that institutions keeps running. Material resources, this can be anything from money, land, food, cars, like all of those things. Sanctions, the ability to punish you for something, right? Like this is most notably connected to like the police, and in more recent history in the United States, the military, but it's definitely abroad has been used for sanctions and definitely being used for sanctions here now, and has in the past. um Authority, this idea that when they say something that people should listen or do what they say, and certain intangibles, so these are certain beliefs and things like that. So the way that these play out is that these sources of power, either through their neutrality or through their active participation, right, they source the opponents with power. So like, for example, if you get out of line, trying to defeat the regime, the police can sanction you, right? They'll arrest you. Same with the military, right? Um, Also certain intangibles. What's the narrative around the thing that's happening? You know, the media has that certain intangible factor. Workers, obviously, probably most notably have human resources. They can either choose to work or not, so on and so forth. And obviously, some of these things overlap. Um, a lot of things we miss with young people is that they have a lot of power, like they have skills and knowledge, they have human resources, they have other intangibles, things like that. And the same with NGOs, right? As a collective, they have human resources, a lot of skills and knowledge. There are some NGOs like, what is it, like that wrote like the 2025 plan or something like that. Those that was written by NGOs, right? And other material resources if those things funnel that way. But one thing to keep in mind about the pillars of support, and this is why this is important for your analysis of the spectrum of allies, is that these pillars aren't just for the opponent, right? Your struggle also has pillars and also has access to the same sources of power, right? So you can access the same power with intangibles, with religious institutions. You could access the same power of human resources with certain NGOs and skills and knowledge, right? We both sides have access to this. So often it's looked at as, what are the opponent's pillars? But in a lot of cases, you can even move those pillars. And we've seen this happen in different regimes, especially if you talk about like maybe the fall of Milosevic. The military and the police pillars actively moved over to the struggle, right? They were actually passive allies at that point, in the sense that their allyship was on the not enforcing whatever the dictator wanted them to do, right? And so um, that's something to think about as well when we're thinking about pillars of support. First and foremost, they are institutions and in society that source the society with power, right? Those institutions can land on either side, right? And then the goal is to, one of the goals is to get them onto your side. Um, and that's something to think about, or dismantle them and ensure that they at least don't have the capacity to source the opponent with power, if they're not going to source yours, right? Which would, in effect, make them a passive ally. And so that's pretty much it. Nevin, if there's any more questions, or I know there's more questions, but I don't know if that was good enough.
Sorry, I was on mute. No, I definitely have more questions. I love the explanation and how you've illustrated a lot of important concepts there that are not the kinds of concepts you always encounter. They're more advanced around the pillars of support. Some of those things that came to mind are like, the different sources of power that these pillars source to society or support an authoritarian regime with. That was very interesting to me. And also the idea that you shared, and you shared this with me before, but I think is really important to note, which is that you've got these pillars of support that are supporting the authoritarian, but also for your own cause and for your own group, you have pillars of support that can kind of move over to your side. And I thought that was really interesting as well. So I'm curious about tactics now. So if you want to if you want to move these pillars, if you want to, some people say break these pillars, some people say, whatever it is, what are some examples of nonviolent tactics that can weaken or erode a pillar without alienating too many of your allies?
It's a really good question. And so this is really when we get into the concept of why is my brain breaking right now? This is when we get into the concept of the mechanisms of change, right? And what mechanism do we want to use? So in general, we won't go too deep into it, but when you're thinking about a tactic that you're going to use, right? You want to be thinking like, am I trying to convert this pillar? That is like convince them that I'm right, right? And so then they come over to my side, right? Am I trying to seek an accommodation for this pillar? Make it so unmanageable that they're just like, okay, fine, I'm not going to do this, you know? Am I trying to coerce this pillar where basically because of a certain leverage point, you force them to do one thing or the other, right? Or am I trying to disintegrate this pillar, like make that pillar completely obsolete, right? And that extends up to the regime as well, right? And so when you're thinking about the tactics that you're going to use, you really want to right size the tactic to the pillar and the makeup of the pillar, right? So say for example, I use this example a lot of times, right? Well, let's take a little example from the previous Spectrum of Ally segment, right?
Yeah.
They could have protested outside of the doors of the church, right? And they could have maybe it could have involved yelling at them. So much of it is just not just what's on paper; it's how you engage in the tactic effectively, right? Like so, you can have the same method on paper, right? And it can the way in which you go about that method can be different. That's why I think it's important, and we don't have to get into too much detail of this. It's important to separate tactics from methods, right? So
Mhm.
a method is a march, right? The tactic could be to convert, right? Which means that march is very solemn, maybe a visual, maybe a slower thing, right? And you're doing it, and you're doing and you're doing a mock funeral or something like that, marching to a church, right? And it's very solemn, it's quiet, it's chill, you know. And so tactically, you are trying to convert the church, right? But the method you are using is you know, a march and or a mock funeral, right? And so you're trying to, on no uncertain terms, right, create a conflict with that church and say you are not doing what you said you were called to do, right? And that's the most important part. But your tactical approach is to convert them, right? Not to coerce them, you know? And so that plays out in how you will execute said method. You know what I mean? And so that's how we understand. That's why we're talking about like the difference between methods and tactics. On the other hand, right? You might have, say, for example, you want to prevent a local store from funneling money into, someone else's coffers or something like that. Maybe they're a big donor or for one cause or the other, right? And so in that case, you may want to coerce them, right? And a way to coerce them is to do several things. One is to to prevent people from buying their products. That could happen in a lot of different ways, right? You could either call for a boycott, or you could do, say, for example, a nonviolent blockade of the storefront, or you could picket the storefront and make it sort of like unmanageable for people to want to go in there. Like no one wants to walk through a crowd of picketers or something like that. Like something like that. So you're using a tactic of coercion, right? You want to effectively remove the resources from this store, this business, right? And the method could be picketing, and the method could be a blockade, right? And that blockade could have things that sort of make it unwelcome for people to want to
Mm,
come to there. You know what I mean?
mm,
Um, and so we really have to think about and what ways we're trying to engage with these particular pillars in order to get exactly what it is we want. One of the things that I think, though, a big mistake that folks make, especially as we're combining neutral, or as we're combining spectrum of allies and pillars of support, is that there I believe so. So let me just put it this way. I believe that you can't be neutral in a moving train, right? So by being neutral, you are supporting the opposition, right? Because the world is going a certain way. You know, I believe that. Paulo Freire believed that. Howard Zinn believed that. Like if you're neutral, you're with the opponent. Okay.
yeah,
Still, right? The way in which you engage with that neutral party will either uh, have them seek solace with the opponent, right? Like, or it will have them, they may want to come and be in community uh, with the struggle, right? And so you have to think about that as you engage like with these folks, and right size it for each pillar. So it's not just like, oh, I'm just not a confrontational person, so I'm going to try to convert everyone. That's not really how it works. You really have to do what the strategy is calling for, not just what you feel like doing, right? And so there may be some people, or if you're going to be a lead, right? There's maybe some people who may just want to participate in conversion activities. So we'll call them for the conversion activities. There may be more people who maybe want to engage in more coercive or accommodation and disintegration activities. Then, like we'll do that as well. But the point is that it's not what you want to do, it's what's being called for that particular pillar, right? So you may be angry at a church, right? But if you know that from a strategic perspective, if you go in there and you sort of like yell at them, that they're just going to be like, we're going to pray about it. You know what I mean?
yeah,
However,
yeah.
if you call them to something different, they might be willing to engage and then move to passive, and then start to contribute those human resources, those material resources, those other resources to your struggle, right?
Got it.
It's
Got
something
it.
to think about. Sorry, I went on.
No, no, you're good. I mean, hearing you is like you're full of so much wisdom that it's like it's so fascinating to hear about the complexity and nuance that you can apply when you apply a strategic lens to the nonviolent struggle. I love it, and I really appreciate it. I want to actually open things up to audience questions, and now that we've got the chat open, I want to invite people to drop their questions in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, we can get you on audio as well. If people have any questions, feel free to ask them now. And in the meantime, as people kind of formulate their questions, I would love to just kind of give you the chance to maybe give a quick response to, like, if people were to think of how to use the pillars of support in like 1, 2, or 3 sentences, like how should a pod use the concept of the pillars of support?
Do your spectrum of allies, make everyone from neutral to active opponents. On the opponent side of pillars, make everyone from passive allies to active allies your struggle pillars, and work on strengthening yours and weakening theirs.
Love it, love it, love it. How succinct that is. That's great. Thank you. I don't see too many questions coming through, so I'm going to move us into a breakout room if that's okay, Joe, with you.
Mhm.
So let me go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and share my shared screen. Oh, wrong one. Sorry about that. Let me go ahead and share a different screen. There we go. Okay. So we've got a breakout room question, which is, in your own community, what are 1 or 2 key pillars of support that help uphold authoritarian power? How might your ResistPod weaken or erode one of those pillars through lawful, nonviolent action? All right. Well, first of all, I just want to thank Joe for sitting with us and giving us a really rich discourse on a couple of topics, spectrum of allies and pillars of support. And I hope that this is the start of a journey for you in a local resistance group or a ResistPod or the broader movement that will help you apply these really valuable concepts. So thank you, Joe, for joining us tonight. It's been really great having you with us. I'd also like to thank our breakout room facilitators, Carolyn Barclift and Richard Procida, for joining us tonight. They are invaluable members of our ecosystem and community and have helped as volunteers consistently throughout much of this series. I want to thank Tracy Adams for co-moderating and leading this discussion. And I finally want to share a couple of things and then do one last thank you. And guess who I'm going to thank last? So the last thing I want to do before getting there is just share a couple of things about this learning series. So we're almost at the end of this learning series. We are at the, we're about to do the 11th episode, or sorry, the 12th episode next week. And there are still ways to engage. Not only can you engage now, but you can also engage even after this course is done. You can join the Google Classroom that I've just put in the chat. You can join the Leadership Lab, or you won't be able to join the Leadership Lab after the course is over, but we still have 2 more sessions of Leadership Lab. So please do swing by if you want to help us improve the course as we go. We learn new things every time we run this webinar. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe we need to make a few adjustments in the next webinar, like keeping the chat open. I know some people will like that, which is good. And maybe, also taking questions live, which seemed to work really well today. Finally, we have a Discord, and we invite everyone to join. That's an online community where we have a lot of interactive discussion taking place. Next, I want to just share that we have a number of social media channels, and interacting with us on social media really helps the cause because it'll help promote Resist Trump campaign in your social media networks. It'll help us grow our followers, which is always good to know and good to have when you're trying to promote a campaign. So I really, really encourage you guys to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Blue Sky, or Meetup or Discord. And I put all of the links to our social media in the chat, and you can find us there. The last person I want to thank, obviously, is you. You have made it so far in this course, and many of you all I recognize from many of our episodes before. Folks like Deanna, Britt, Kay, Mara, Sarah, you guys have really dedicated yourself to participating in this course, and I am very grateful for that. Hopefully this knowledge will serve you well as activists, and that you can share this knowledge with other people and bring them into the movement. So thank you the most for joining us tonight. You make this experience real, you make it possible, and we were really grateful for you joining us. Guys, have a great week and good luck in your resistance. May it be peaceful and joyous. Have a great weekend, have a great week, and talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
See y'all later. Bye-bye.